Good afternoon, and I hope you're enjoying the 2021 Sloan Sports Analytics Conference. My name is Dan Borchik, and I'm a first-year MBA and engineering student at MIT. And it's my pleasure to introduce our panel, The Invisible Opponent, Our Mental Health Crisis. Our panelists today are Shane Battier, former NCAA and NBA champion and current VP for the Miami Heat, TJ Manatop, leading Filipino sports commentator and news broadcast journalist, ABS-CBN, and Kevin Warren, Commissioner of the Big Ten Conference. Our panel will be moderated by Corbin Petro, the CEO and co-founder of Eleanor Health. The moderated panel will run for 35 minutes and we'll leave 10 minutes at the end for audience Q&A. Please use the hashtag #TheInvisibleOpponent on Twitter to submit questions to our panelists, and I will also monitor the chat on All in the Loop for questions. With that, I'll turn it over to Corbin.
Thanks, Dan, and thank you, Shane, Commissioner Warren, and TJ for joining us for this important discussion in a topic that's been elevated in visibility through the pandemic. Personally, I see the impact of COVID on mental health every day in my work as co-founder and CEO of Eleanor Health, where we provide care for people affected by mental illness and substance use disorder. Mental health affects all of us and doesn't discriminate, yet stigma still exists. Critical to this audience, the sports community has a disproportionately high number of people facing mental health crises, with 35% of athletes facing one in their lifetime. Yet the percentage of athletes seeking treatment is significantly lower than that of the general public. And with that as a backdrop, I'd love to start with a question for you, Shane. You experienced athletic success at an early age and consistently achieved. You're the only person in history to win both the Naismith Prep Player of the Year and the Naismith College Player of the Year, recognizing you as the top high school athlete in basketball and the top college basketball player. Tell us about your journey, that level of success for such a long period of time, and why mental health is important to you.
Oh, wow. That's a weighty question. Look, looking back at my career, I did not do a good job of fostering my mental health. I'm 42 years old, but when I was coming up, mental health was not looked at something as that could unlock your success and your potential. It was actually looked at as a negative. If you're talking about anxiety, depression, those are things that are used against you in your climb to your ultimate dream, which for me was to make the NBA. Looking back at it, I would have loved to have someone to talk to, someone to decompress with, someone to talk about the fears that I had. And because I always felt that I had to be the model of consistency, of toughness, both mental and physical. And, I didn't realize how detrimental that acting that way was until I really retired. And it sort of manifests itself in many ways. But it really makes me happy to see that this is a topic that's on the top of everyone's mind, that we can openly talk about and discuss. It's not stigmatized as much as it was, even 20 years ago when I was a senior at Duke University. And so this is a really, really important discussion. Thank you for having me. And I'm just glad we've come a long ways, even in a very short period.
Thanks, Shane. Commissioner Warren, you obviously work with athletes every day, and you've sort of made it a priority within your time at the Big Ten. Can you tell us a little bit more about the mental health and wellness cabinet that you've created, and sort of why you decided now, and what the impact's been?
Yes, it's good to see everyone. But when I was hired in the summer of 2019 as commissioner-elect, it was even before I actually formally became commissioner in January 2020 that I made it a priority to form and launch the Big Ten Mental Health and Wellness Cabinet. And I was just thinking, over my, athletic career many years ago, but really, there are two things, I would say, two inflection points that really guided me toward recognizing the importance of doing that. One, I have a son who's currently a Power 5 football student athlete. And even before I interviewed for the Big Ten job, we were having, Easter dinner, and he had some teammates over who had gone to different colleges, other Power 5 conferences, and we were having a conversation. I was asking them, what was their biggest kind of challenge transitioning from high school into college? And one of the prominent players who will play in the NFL one day, who started as a freshman, said, is really my mental health and wellness. I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, during the football season, I had some issues with a girlfriend. Academics was a lot harder. I was away from home. I'm starting as a freshman. And so I went to the on-campus student life hospital to sign up for an appointment to get some help from a mental health and wellness standpoint. He said, this woman looked at her computer and said, I'm so glad you're here. This is a really important step, and we can take you in. And gave a date 3 months later. How does that sound for you? And he said, 3 months to me, you might as well have been saying 3 years from now. He said, I needed really help then. And he said, even when he went back to his dorm room, his roommate had looked at him as a leader, of someone who would be mature to go get help. And when he came back and said, the first time I can get in is 3 months from now. So that's really when that resonated with me. But what really has me focus on the mental health and wellness of our student athletes. We have almost 10,000 student athletes in the Big Ten Conference, across 11 states, all the way from Nebraska to New Jersey. But as a 10-and-a-half-year-old young kid, I was on my bike one day in Phoenix, Arizona, and was in a serious and horrific car accident, or I should say a car ran over me. I was on my bike, and by the grace of God was not killed, landed on a small piece of grass after traveling 30 yards in the air. And through all of the different medical procedures, months in the hospital and traction, I had a compound fracture of my femur. Then I was in a full body cast. All of those doctors who helped me physically, not one time did anyone come to me and say, how are you feeling mentally and emotionally? And I think what's happened, the rest of my life is I've had to kind of rewire my brain to deal with it. But that's when I recognized the importance. I wish someone had come to me and helped me to deal with all the mental trauma that I went to during that period, on top of the physical trauma.
It's amazing. What a story. And obviously, had you had exposure and had visibility, been a part of your upbringing, probably you would have been able to address it. And that sort of brings to TJ, you've suffered and struggled with depression since high school, and decided a couple of years ago to be very visible and outspoken about it. And I wanted to just understand a little bit more about what made you decide to do that, and what the sort of impact has been, and how important is it for people who are public facing like yourself, or athletes, to really show their vulnerability in a way like this.
Yeah, it was a very serendipitous series of events wherein, I've been a broadcaster, news journalist, and sportscaster since year 2000. And, I went through the roughest part of it during high school and first year of college. And I was able to, overcome it pretty much, really, and be able to thrive and find a good career. But I started to encounter people in my work that were advocates for mental health, advocates for, suicide prevention. And during a couple of interviews, I actually mentioned my story, on live television, which shocked a lot of people. And that woman who was running a suicide prevention organization, invited me to give a talk at a school. And when I shared my story, a lot of students came up to me and thanked me for sharing my experience. And I promised that woman, and she actually is a friend of my mother's, Jeannie Goldburn, of the Natasha Goldberg Foundation. And I promised her about 8 years ago, I said, you know what, I think I'll write a book about this. And it was a procrastinated project back in the back burner of my back pocket. Many years passed. I forgot about the promise I made until I started watching a lot of YouTube. And if you're familiar with a YouTuber named Casey Neistat, he was such an amazing filmmaker that I was inspired by how he told stories. And I realized, I was turning 40 that year, and I think it's time to tell my story. And I think instead of a book, I think it has to be a video, because it has more impact with the youth. And that's what I did. I gathered some friends in production. It was a tell-all video. I went in graphic detail because I'm a broadcast journalist, and I'm biased to the medium of visual arts. And I think it took them on that journey, on that ride. And when I released that video in early 2018, it went viral in the Philippines. Everyone's like, it's that TV guy, it's a sportscaster. He went through that, and that. And I really wanted to give them hope, because as a journalist, I've lost count how many times I've had to do reports on suicides. And I'm like, is this the only time it's talked about in the media, when it's shock and awe and it's bad news? But, the statistics will show, obviously, that there's many more people who are alive and thriving. Why don't we talk about them, the good things they're doing, that they're okay, and put mental health on that spotlight? And that's what I started back then. And I'm grateful that it was so many things happened at the same time. The Philippines passed a new mental health bill. Other celebrities came out, told their stories as well. So I'm glad that we're able to show people who we can look up to. Other conditions always had people like cancer, AIDS, whatnot. They're always these heroes of survivors. Back then, we never thought of heroes of survivors of mental health. And that's what I want to do. And it started the ball rolling.
Thanks, TJ. Obviously, your visibility and your vulnerability has helped others. And I think, obviously, athletes could play a similar role. Shane, you talked about how you weren't great with your mental health while you were a player. Do you see that changing? Do you see athletes showing more vulnerability? And maybe a little bit about how, as you've progressed into your post-athlete career, how you've been more thoughtful about your mental health and maybe have helped others to find that path.
Yeah, I really applaud some of the players like Kevin Love and DeMar DeRozan coming out and talking about mental health and wellness because it is a huge part of who we are as people. Forget athletic performance, and it needs to be destigmatized. Especially for young people to realize, hey, look, we're all going through some things at some point, and you're not alone, which is probably the hardest part as an athlete, as a visible athlete. You think you're the only one ever experiencing anxiety or depression, when the fact is it's actually really, really common amidst the athletic community. And as a father now of two kids, and as someone who's vice president for the Miami Heat, and we deal with young players coming up, it's a part of our teaching. It's part of our discussions, and it should be. Look, we all want to optimize. We all want to be the best people that we can be. And in the athletic world, yeah, that means physical conditioning. That means doing great film study and being coachable and understanding your craft to the best of your ability. But it also entails optimizing your psychological health, your mental health, your spiritual health, being holistically healthy. And there's a big push, and before, obviously this is an analytics conference, and we don't have the metrics, so to speak, that we can measure, the impact of having sound mental health and wellness. But we all know it helps. It helps performance. It helps team performance. It helps individual performance. And so it's great that we're dedicating resources and hiring personnel to help everybody, not just young people, everybody optimize their mental health and wellness.
That's great. And I saw a little tiny person walking behind you during the meeting. So I appreciate that you have little ones around the house. I'd love to just get thoughts from any one of you around the impact of COVID. Has that sort of escalated the conversation? What's been the challenge of athletes during this time? Some of which, may have missed, a season that sprung them into the professional leagues or took them out of the situation that they were in into a college career. We'd love to get just, anyone's thoughts on the impact that COVID's had.
Speaking from the Big Ten, life is hard. And I think that's one of the reasons why I've always tried to promote, especially this last year, is to provide each one of us some grace. We're all taught as athletes to push beyond a certain point, to work harder, to grind, which is all still important, whether you're an athlete or in corporate America. But when you think about what our young people in the world are having to deal with today, being a student athlete, going to class, taking exams, and then all the limitations and restrictions with, COVID, having to participate, athletically at a high level, not enjoying the college experience, having family members who have actually, died from COVID. It is a complex time. So I think one of the things, and you had all the different issues from a social standpoint, from all the issues with George Floyd and that young people, all of us, are dealing with on a daily basis. So I just think it's important that we need to really, like I said, afford all of us, or individually, collectively, to have more grace in this world, to have more understanding, to be more, empathetic, which is really, important. And that's why, our cabinet is so critical. We've pulled individuals. We have an incredible medical community in the Big Ten together to address these issues. And from a health and wellness standpoint for our student athletes, and someone in a meeting the first day that we launched our mental health and wellness cabinet, and one of the things that we did, we provided the Calm map to all of our Big Ten family. And so we've had over 17,000 Big Ten affiliated individuals subscribe through the Calm map, which we provided to them. And through a relationship that we've had with, one of Shane's cohorts in LeBron, but having a relationship with Maverick Carter and with LeBron, and seeing what Calm has done. So we provided that free of charge to all of our student athletes, our coaches, our administrators in the Big Ten. So we have 17,000 of those subscriptions. And what's interesting, since last May, we've had more than 250,000 Calm sessions up to this date. And in one of our first meetings, when you start talking about from an analytical standpoint, someone asked me what would constitute success. And back to what TJ and Shane have said, I said, if this saves one person's life, just one, if one person had made a determination to harm themselves or do something that they shouldn't do, or to take a step back, it's worth it. And so I just think from that standpoint is that we need to make sure that we're doing everything we can, not only for young people, but for every person we meet, to make them as comfortable and to be as understanding as we possibly can, because we're in a very complicated time in our lives and history due to COVID-19.
Well, as for me in the Philippines, I'm still, I straddle 2 time zones, and I cover the news for the Filipinos in the US, and I'm still in touch and tune with what's happening back home. It's a major struggle. The mental health aspect of life has really been amplified because of the lockdowns. The Philippines had one of the longest, if not the longest, national lockdowns in the world. We're undergoing another one right now because of another wave, and the college season has not resumed. So, we've had a lot of college athletes who have just been not even training. They're not even allowed to do bubble training at all. So if my only hope is that with what's been going on is at hopefully at least the management of these teams, the coaching staff, and even their parents, can put some emphasis and awareness to their mental well-being and their mental wellness. Because there's not much they can do. They can do individual training, but they're a lot of these kids are under the clock because a lot of them are from the poorest communities of the Philippines. Breaking through to college is a big step, and getting to the pros will get their families out of poverty. So they already have that given pressure on them. So if you lose a year of that momentum of that training, of that exposure, of that ability to develop your skills and your name and your talent, it's a big blow to them. So it's a lot of unknown. We don't know what's going to happen as we eventually ease out of this pandemic. But I hope that one lesson that athletes, and coaches and management all over the world will learn is that it is something really, as Shane said, it's so important to highlight the priority of mental wellness as much as physical. Because, even as a parent, I grew up in a culture that, parents in the Philippines are so concerned about physical well-being. Don't get hurt. Don't run there. Don't do this. But few people are aware to ask the right questions about how they're doing mentally and emotionally. And I think when they plant those seeds, that foundation, you'll see them growing as better, more holistic individuals that are, more resilient to these challenges, physical and emotional.
Yeah. So go ahead. Go ahead, Shane.
I have to commend Commissioner Warren. Most people don't realize the logistical power that it takes just to get our student athletes, our professional athletes through one practice. The stress and the anxiety and the planning, it is taking literally an army. And so if you're in it, you have tremendous empathy for everybody who is going through this as an athlete, because look, we are all social animals. Most of us play team sports because of the social aspect, the ability to hug our teammate, to give them a high five, to give them a slap on the butt, right? And that's the great part about sports. And in COVID, it's taboo. You can't do those things, and that's really, really hard. And then you throw the fact you throw the fact on top of that that most people look at athletes, whether it's student athletes, professional athletes, and say, look, you got it good. You're going to school for free. You're getting paid millions of dollars to play a game. What are you complaining about? All right. You combine that with the isolation of COVID. You can't even like give your teammate a high five. You don't have any empathy from the outside world to what you have to do to go to one practice. It's very lonely. And then you throw gasoline on the fire, and the only feedback that you get is not the fans cheering, not the parents in the stands, is social media, where it's inherently a negative, harmful medium. It's a wonder that our athletes and our student athletes are getting through anything right now, and that's the reality that we're getting through. And I like to think that sports teaches a lot of great lessons, like how to handle adversity, so you sort of get through it as best as you can. But there's no question there's going to be some residual effects of this for our athletes, and unless you go through it daily, it's really, really hard to understand how difficult it is from an emotional side, logistics side, a physical side. Just really, really an amazing time.
Yeah, you mentioned social media, Shane. You and I talked about social media and the impacts. I think similar to COVID-19, can have very sort of detrimental effects to one's mental health. You were quoted during your time with Miami Heat of saying, "I had the great fortune of Twitter and social media telling me how terrible I was every single day." And with 97% of adolescents, assuming a large portion of athletes on social media, would love to get sort of more of your thoughts on that impact, our role as society, and then sort of the compounding effects of social media, COVID, the isolation. I know this is an area you feel.
Yeah, I've lived it. I still live it. I still got people, 25 years later from University of Maryland or North Carolina who we had pretty good success against, tell me how bad I am, or tell me how much they hate me, and through social media. And it's just tough. It's really tough. There's no handbook out there that teaches kids, like, look, this is how you deal with social media. This is how you handle. This is how you put it in perspective. And look, if you have any following at all, everybody knows that one negative comment negates the 99 you may get that are positive and glowing. Because again, we all want to be liked. We all want to be loved. We all want to be part of something. We all want to feel we belong. And maybe that's evolutionary, that we feel that if we're ostracized from the group, then we're more susceptible to the wolves and the lions picking us off. But we all just want to be loved. Every last one of us want to be part of something. And as a father now, as a manager of a young team, I just see how detrimental social media can be to the psyche of a still developing brain. Like our young people's brains still develop until they're 25 years old. All right, they're still figuring it out and still processing it. And the negative, I guess, neurons that they're strengthened by being exposed to this negativity again and again and again and again and again without filter. It's really harming. It's really harming. And the stroke and the adulation can be great, and I've seen a lot of people get addicted to it. But I've also seen people really be affected by the negativity of social media. And so, now that I'm an old man, I like to think I have a better perspective on it. But look, when someone still slings the arrow from afar anonymously at me, it still hurts. It still hurts. And, I've won championships, and, I've lived my dream way more than I ever thought I would. And so, the more we can, support our young people when it comes to social media, tell them, look, these are just mean people out there, and it's the authentic relationships that we develop, through our teams, through our families, through our circles of friends. At the end of the day, that's all that matters. That's all that matters, and the rest of it literally is just noise. But it's a difficult lesson, and it contributes to a lot of the anxiety and depression issues that our young people and our old people face.
Well, and it's a double-edged sword. I mean, I'd love to hear Commissioner Warren. Obviously, the isolation that athletes and all college students have experienced during this time. what's that balance? So social media for many could be that social outlet, that way that they are creating and developing community. While on the backdrop, you rely on that community who then is, negatively impacting you, that 1 out of 100. How do you face that with your student athletes in the Big Ten?
Yeah, similar to Shane. I mean, I just have always not been a proponent of social media. I've just in the last years even become even worse. And back to having grace on young people. I mean, I went through a situation last year because we started the season later than some people thought we should have, regardless of what we felt was the right thing to do medically. Speaking, and I had death threats. I mean, I was getting regular updates from the FBI as far as the number of people who had, bounties on my head on social media. I'm 57 years old. I have probably not really concerned about what people think of me, but it's taken me a long time to get to that point. And a lot of it started with my, accident. I felt horrible, this year where in the playoffs, where some fans thought that some of our student athletes didn't perform as well as they should have during the NCAA tournament, and they said some really mean and hurtful things. These are fans of allegedly of the schools where these student athletes went and attended, and so you just shake your head, and you recognize, back to what we've said. Life is a challenge. It really is. I mean, and it's really important that we control social media and not let it control others. It's always disturbing to me when my wife and I go out to dinner and look around, even before the pandemic, and you see sometime a family, the mom's head's down, the dad's head is down, the kids' heads are down, and no one is really even talking with each other. And so the thing that I'm most concerned about are going to be the long-term ramifications that we won't know until 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now of what this last year, how it impacted our brains, how it impacted relationships, now that we're starting to dig out. So I'm a big proponent for our student athletes to be supported, to make sure they don't get too engrossed in this whole social media deal and how many people like you and all those different things. It is a cruel world. And you need to make sure that you focus on developing, tangible, long-term, relationships. And I just am literally in the final days of finishing the book that I wrote on my accident called Build Your Own Pool. And because what I did is that the doctor, who wasn't real supportive, he was a good surgeon, but he was not Mr. Rogers, didn't really give me a chance to really walk or have a sports career. And 7 years after my accident, I was playing college basketball, but he did say one thing to me, that swimming would give me the best chance of recovery. So I convinced my parents, and that's when I knew I'd probably be a lawyer, to allow me to use the majority of my settlement to put a swimming pool in our backyard. And that's what nursed me back to recovery. So it was during those times of solace. But I've already started to outline another book, not about COVID, but it's really going to be called, 15 minutes. And I say that until you go through a serious testing regimen, like many of us had to do, that 15-minute period, and I'm sure, Shane, you can attest to that. I know for me, like, it would cause me, like, my palms to sweat, and I would go through everything. What happens if I got COVID and I now can't go to the game or can't go present a trophy, all the stress. And I wasn't even playing, and I was now thinking about what our student athletes was going through. But those 15-minute time periods, really was a time for us to kind of reflect about what really was and what is important. And I just look at all the things our student athletes have had to go through, even from a daily testing regimen. It's really complicated, and that's why I'm so grateful that you are having this panel today to talk about the importance of mental health on a small scale and also on a large scale.
Yeah, TJ, what about you? Obviously, you've had some positives of social media, your YouTube video that really elevated your profile in talking about mental illness and depression. And then obviously you transition that into improving policies. And I think you have like 1 million or something Twitter followers. So you have a strong platform to talk about these things. So It seems like you've leveraged it mainly for good. Would love to hear sort of your thoughts there too.
Well, it's interesting, it is a double-edged sword. It's a powerful tool that can be used for greater good, but unfortunately, as Shay noted, that it's amplified that the worst of human beings come out on social media when they are keyboard warriors hiding behind an egg and a fake name, and it's Shane 10745, and then they'll just bash you. But it brings to light that concept of resilience. Really, I mean, as parents now, all of us are, and how it's critical to raise our children cognizant of the dangers of addiction to social media. And I'll never forget, I read this riveting article in the Atlantic in 2017. It was very controversial. It was called "Are Smartphones Killing This Generation of Teens?" And he meant that literally, because suicide rates, depression rates have gone up at the same time as smartphones and social media came to rise. So it's pretty much a no-brainer to see what else was a major cause in the spikes of depression and anxiety, and the lack of interaction in the streets, and people coming out. And to Shane's point, social relationships are the key. I mean, I was so moved by the recent book of Johan Hari called The Lost Connections, where he did such amazing research all over the world and found that one of the key components of alleviating oneself from depression and anxiety is meaningful relationships, meaningful friendships and relationships. And the leaders nowadays of personal development, they'll all encourage, take your relationships offline. If you make a friend on Twitter or Instagram, whatnot, have coffee with them, have a walk in the park or whatnot. There's so much power in that. Humans were meant to live in tribes. We're not meant to live in isolation. So maybe that's why also we're highlighting, magnifying all this depression and isolation with COVID. But with social media, one thing I always advise kids when I give talks back in the Philippines is that, be aware that this could danger to mental health. Be aware. Take a step back if you can. I wish I could, but I'm a journalist, so I'm on it 24/7. You should see my Twitter notification feed. It's like a news ticker. It's nonstop. So I wish I could, but I couldn't. So I love the times when I'm on vacation, or at least on a Saturday morning, I totally ignore my phone, just make my coffee, walk outside like a phone doesn't exist. And normal humans can do that. That's what I encourage them to do. You can even have 2 Instagram accounts in one phone. One is for normal friends and whatnot, then switch to another one purely for inspiration, purely for the roses and whatnot, for the nice quotes. And it's a good boost. So if they're aware that there is that danger, and they're aware that they can use it for good too, funnel it for good, look for the good accounts to follow, ignore and block the haters right away. That's a good step in the right direction. But I agree with Commissioner Warren. I worry what's going to be like in the next few years, because it's really in its infancy stage as a technology, and it's seeding these seeds in our culture all over the world. So we don't know yet where this is going, but I hope there are a lot of smart people who care enough who can do something about it.
I mean, before we transition to some of the audience questions, I wanted to, Shane, you and I, when we talked a little bit, and I felt like you made it really relatable, which I feel is a strong thing that athletes can do. Just some of your transitions, going from an elite high school athlete to a college athlete to a professional athlete into now a former professional athlete. It's a lot of transitions. It takes a lot of toll on your identity and your mental health. I'd love for you to share a little bit about those experiences, and how obviously it's relatable to anyone.
When you're young and you feel invincible as a young athlete, whether it's in high school or college or in the professional ranks, you think it's going to go on forever, right? You're not thinking about, one day you're going to take off the jersey for the last time, right? And when you're in that mode, you don't realize, you think, I'm invincible, nothing can touch me. And then it hits you, transition, when you're the guy who used to play. And all of a sudden, that brought a world of really pain into my world. And for a guy who graduated from Duke, I worked on Wall Street for a summer. I'd saved my money. I'd lived out my dream. I said, I got transition. This is no big deal. I didn't want to play anymore. I want to do something else. But I've really struggled. I really struggled. Now I felt really, really alone, because the mentality that brought me to the levels of my athletic career, the discipline, dedication, inability to make excuses, the grit, were unbelievable, and they made me bulletproof. But they also were really, really harmful in a lot of ways as I transitioned out. And newsflash, everybody on this panel, everybody watching this panel is going to transition one day. You know, whether you are Commissioner Warren and you say, you know what, I want to go fishing every single day. I'm tired of being the commissioner of Big Ten. The day you walk out that office, you're the guy who used to be the Big Ten commissioner. You know, JT says, you know, I'm done writing. I just want to sit on a beach and hang out with my family. He's the guy who used to be the world famous journalist. And, you know, it doesn't matter what your job is, what your role is. This is going to be a day when you used to be the person that got you the platform. And that's hard. And that's hard. And you feel alone. And you feel isolated. And there's nothing that prepares you for that day when you are the person that is now known as the person you were used to be. And I went through a lot of trials and tribulation. I have a wonderful wife who said, look, Shane, I love options. So here's 3 options for you. Here's a number to the Marriott. Here's a number to your attorney, or here's a number to a life coach / psychologist that comes very highly recommended. And I said, Heidi, you're a very smart woman. I'm going to choose door 3. And it led me on a journey, really for the first time in my life, that I opened up, that I sought help in this period that I had no frame of reference for, transition. And to what JT talked about, what you realize, it is about the authentic relationships you make along the way are the only thing that matters in the end. You know, what do you learn about yourself, and what are the authentic relationships that you make and the connection that you make, which is the great antidote for a lot of the mental health issues that we're talking about, you know. And so, you know, the homework for everyone watching this panel, something we can all do, you know, call someone you love them, say, you know what, I appreciate you and thank you, and show gratitude for having that person in your life. And you'll be amazing, the endorphins that it creates in your own mind, and give you a little boost. And if you can make that a habit, you can ward off a lot of ills that we all suffer from coming out of COVID, in COVID. Not the answer to everything. I'm not a Pollyanna and say that will solve everything, but it's an amazing start when you talk about improving your mental health. And so I'm in a much better place now, but knowing that I have to be vulnerable, especially to the people who I created authentic relationships with, is maybe the most important lesson that I've learned, you know, really maybe ever.
I love it. Thank you, Shane. I'm going to switch over to some of these audience questions. This first one's for Commissioner Warren. What has been your takeaway from interacting directly with Big Ten athletes about their mental health, of playing without fans, and from being away from their families last season?
I mean, the biggest takeaway is that they are spectacular, young, and talented people. It's a reminder to me of why I accepted the opportunity. I don't even call it a job anymore. I call it a platform, a movement. They're spectacular. Unfortunately, I've been able to develop some wonderful relationships, you know, with them, and having 2 young people, a daughter 24 and a son 22. Both of them have been athletes. It's just really been an extension of the family, and I think it just reiterates that. And I tell a lot of our student athletes, and I feel confident that during this period of time, to watch them, what they did in our Equality Coalition and our voter registration initiative, that one of them is going to be President of the United States. And I believe that. But one thing it's taught me, because it's so easy as an adult, especially when you're in corporate America, unless you're in coaching or a professor, to lose that common touch with young people. And this has just really stirred my soul, and very similar to what Shane said. I challenge people all the time, and not even texting. Pick up the phone and call a couple people and tell them what they meant to you. I just wrote some notes today. You know, when's the last time I'm big into handwritten letters, that you wrote someone a letter? There's still letters that, you know, I have from instrumental people in my lives, or parents that are 30, 40 years ago that we rely upon. And so that's what it's taught me, that we have a spectacular group of young people, and they watch everything that we do. We're modeling for them. And so I think it's time for us to continually to return to being the adults in the room, and be great leaders, admit our mistakes, you know, and admit when we fall short, but to really do the best that we possibly can almost to realize that today could be our last day on earth, and do all that we can to make this world a better place. And I'm just focused on doing everything we can to make sure that we leave this world a better place than it was handed to us.
Great. Another question here, I think any one of you could answer. What tips and practices would you have teams implement? And I'll add from a medical perspective, we talk about universal screenings or, a checkup from the neck up is one thing that we talk about. Would love to hear thoughts on, those tips and practices that teams could implement.
Something that's changed my life. And again, I love low cost probes. All right. What's the least amount I can put in for the greatest benefit? And I was very anti-meditation. I was very anti-breathing. I'm like, this is a bunch of malarkey. And it wasn't until after I got done playing that I realized taking time for myself every day. I wake up a half an hour earlier than my family, because that's my quiet time. And I write in my gratitude journal about 3 things I'm thankful for every single day. And then I do my breathing. I do my Wim Hof breathing, my breath hold, my base breath hold, and my meditation every single day. And it allows me to clear my mind. And it's made me more productive. It's made me a happier person. It's made me a more calm person. And so I believe in the science of meditation and just taking time for yourself, because in this world of iPhones and Twitter and everything else, once the day starts, it's impossible to find it. So carve out that time in the morning for yourself to think, reflect, write. It will do wonders for your mental health and wellness over a long period of time, and it's free.
Yeah, TJ, I know
Right there.
meditation. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you know why? Because exactly a year ago, Easter last year, during the lockdown, was when I decided I needed to be healthier holistically. And I did meditation before sporadically, but I was fortunate enough to find somebody who's a leading inspirational speaker. His name is Jay Shetty. He was doing a live Facebook meditation for anybody all over the world for free. And I was lucky that my kid was going to virtual school, so I'd have to drive him to school. And it was 9 a.m. Pacific time, so I would join it every day. And I did that every day. And I eventually discovered Wim Hof as well, Shane. I did the cold showers and the breathing techniques. I didn't realize it would be hard to breathe, right? All those deep breaths, it was tough, but when you get it, you feel the effects. And then I got a gratitude journal as well. And I've read up on the science, I understand it, and I feel it. The very first time I wrote those 3 things I'm grateful for, it felt like a happy pill that I just took, like, wow. And literally I just wrote, I'm thankful for my kids, thankful for the hug and love and embrace of my wife, I'm thankful for my cup of coffee. And when I just reflected, I'm like, wow, sometimes you realize what these things are for. And then just to give a short story, what that prepared me for was amazing, because what happened last year beyond the pandemic, if you Google this, you'll find out ABS-CBN, my network, we lost our public franchise due to political controversies, put it that way. We had a company of 10,000 people, we're down to 3,000. 7,000 people had to lose their jobs. I did not know what was going to happen to me here, because we went through a controversial congressional hearing that was televised nationally. It dragged on for like a month. If you put a recipe for disaster for me to have an anxiety attack, I probably should have had one already by that time. And I was amazed to find myself at calm and at peace, because I was just grateful for what I had. I knew that whatever may come my way is beyond my control. I've learned that as the biggest key of overcoming anxiety is learning acceptance, knowing what you can control 100% and what you cannot. And Shane, I told this to Corbin before we got on last week, is that I'll never forget the quote of LeBron James in one of the finals when one of the media guys asked him about his legacy and the pressure. And he goes, you know what? I put out 110% on the floor. And whatever results that come out of that, I can live with that. I have my family, I have my life outside of the basketball court. I'm happy. And to me, it resonated that it is what it is. There's 9 other guys on the court you can't control. And then there's 3 referees. No matter what kind of human being you are, you can't control the outcome of that. So you have to relieve yourself of the pressure of the things that you don't have 100% control. Do your best, still give your best. And that's what I learned college onwards. And it released a lot of anxiety. It let go of a lot of triggers in my life. So that coupled with the meditation, I love the Calm app, Commissioner Warren. That's the app I use as well now. Gratitude journal. calling people up. Last year, I had the urge to just give a video message to my mom and my dad and just tell them I love them and appreciate them. And it's the first time I ever did anything like that. And I just felt just the joy of telling them how much I love them. And I detailed everything, the difficulties we went through. But it's something that few people realize how important it is, especially now with COVID. As you know, you never know. As Commissioner Warren said, you never know when could be your last day.
And Corbin, what I started to do is with my schedule, like I calendar my workouts. I have them booked for the next year. I calendar my massages, and I treat it like a meeting. And then, because in the eye of the storm last year, when we were in the middle of COVID, I always want to focus on one thing a year. And 2020 was my year to focus on my prayer life. I didn't know it would be elevated like it was, but I've now just have developed a habit of every time I get out of the bed or I get in the bed, and every time I'm in the shower, I get down on my hands and knees and my face just to be submissive, to really ask and pray for guidance and direction. So that has really calmed my spirit. But my workouts, I don't interfere with them. My massages, I don't interfere with them. And then one thing I had studied for like the last 5 years, I was really studying like what made the CEOs that I admired. Because the key in life, as Adam Newman, who works at the Big Ten, has said to me, is to always gain the respect of the people you respect. People you don't respect, you don't need to get their respect. But I always focus on what made those CEOs special that I respected. And one thing that seemed consistent was when they were in a meeting, you could not see their cell phones. Their cell phones were off. And so I've made it a priority. When I'm in a meeting, I turn my phone off. So one thing I would say to all the panelists, when you're in a meeting, when you're at a dinner, turn your phone off. And I think that's so critical, because otherwise you're never fully, engaged. If people need to find you, and they can find you, they know how to find you. And if you find out something a year later, it's okay. I was on a flight today, and a young person next to me, when the flight attendant told us that the Wi-Fi wasn't working, you would have thought, something that went wow. It's okay to turn your phone off. So I think we need to just get back to the basics of taking especially what TJ and Shane did, make sure we carve our time to ourselves. And I talk about this in my book. If you listen, next time you're on a commercial flight, what do they say is to make sure you put your mask on first before helping others. And I think so many times in life, we're putting everyone else's mask on first and not ours. And that really has resonated with me. You got to put your mask on. We got to be whole and take care of ourselves for us to be able to take care of those who we need to be in a position to take care of. And it's okay to put yourself first sometime when it comes to health and wellness.
Yeah. Well, thank you. We're out of time. So in the spirit of gratitude, wanted to thank you all for your leadership, for your visibility, for your vulnerability, and really highlighting mental health, destigmatizing mental health. And thank you for participating in the panel today.
Thank you.
Thank you for everything you're doing. All right. TJ and Shane, God bless you all.
Likewise.
Safe.